As a robust power, Germany has played a profound role in history. Yet the modern state of Germany only came into existence less than 2 centuries ago when a chain of events disrupted the stalemate in Europe. This revolutionary era was marked with innovation, conflict, political intrigue, social overhaul, and much more, all of which contributed to the unification of Germany. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Prior to unification, the territories of modern Germany were part of the Holy Roman Empire, which was a collection of hundreds of kingdoms, principalities, duchies, and city-states. As a decentralized realm, the Holy Roman Empire was a self-contained world. Most of its rivers were not interconnected and led to different seas, cities, and markets. Some regions, such as Alsace-Lorraine, had more day-to-day communication with France, while others, such as Bavaria, identified with Austria. Since the German states lacked a physical link with one another, the local rulers did not have the means to consult with the central authority, and instead made autonomous decisions in terms of labor, finances, and security. As such, over the course of history, every principality developed into a de facto independent state. Moreover, since the principalities lacked the demographics to compete on their own, they had to get more efficient with their limited labor pools. In consequence, the local states developed sophisticated organizational systems that captured the talent of academics, bankers, military thinkers, etc. In other words, since quantity was not an option, quality and competence became the backbone of the German culture. Yet, despite their individual virtues, the members of the Holy Roman Empire were consumed by internal rivalries, coalitions, and alliances. The fragmented realm was incapable of defending itself. Having said that, the hundreds of local states were so autonomous that no outside power could outright occupy it all. The result was that the traditional powers who surrounded the Holy Roman Empire, such as Austria, France, Poland, Denmark, Sweden, and Russia, viewed the collection of German principalities as a buffer zone that kept the geopolitics of Europe in check. One state, however, broke away from this stalemate. Located in the northeastern corner of the Holy Roman Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia bordered the Russian, Polish, and Swedish empires, and in spite of their demographic disadvantage, Prussia had managed to stand its ground by meticulously planning to make the most of its scarce assets. For instance, to capture the skill and talent of its subjects, Prussia had made education compulsory in its realm in 1717. This was well over a century before the British, and it illustrates just how much the Germans value talent, skill, and quality. In addition, when drafting a policy plan, the Prussian government in Berlin would include the considerations of scientists, industrialists, and military thinkers. Perhaps the embodiment of the Prussian organizational competence was its army, which was one of the largest and most professional standing armies in Europe at a time when most armies were made up of peasants. The proficiency of the Prussian army would play a decisive role over the course of history. In the 19th century, Napoleon consolidated his control over France and led his revolutionary armies into Central Europe, where he steamrolled through the continent. It took 2 decades and 7 coalitions that involved every major European power to push back the French. In the process, the Holy Roman Empire had ceased to exist, and the hundreds of member states had been reduced to 39. In wake of this, nationalism surged in the German-speaking regions, and under these circumstances, Prussia would emerge as a new powerhouse. For its role in the Napoleonic Wars, Prussia nearly doubled its territorial holdings and gained about 500,000 subjects. Above all, due to the inadequate conduct of the Austrian Habsburg dynasty, the Prussian House of Hohenzollern became the preferred faction among the German principalities who had become conscious of their security vulnerabilities. At the backdrop of these political events was the Industrial Revolution, which introduced technological advances in manufacturing. Yet the Germans could not take part in this revolution because of their internal divisions. More precisely, the German states were unable to industrialize because they lacked free access to consumers. For instance, commodities that were produced in Prussia had to be taxed and inspected before reaching Bavaria, where coal and steel had to undergo the same inspections in the opposite direction. This created additional costs for the German industries and stimulated economic disparity across the region. The Prussians, however, perceived the security and industrial shortcomings as an opportunity to compel the German states into a single entity. Like so, in 1834, the Prussian government in Berlin formalized a customs union that abolished tariffs and created a single capital and labor market. This customs union, known as the Zollverein, accelerated Germany's industrialization process. It also strengthened the Prussian influence in North Germany. However, the German experience with the Industrial Revolution was unique. Unlike other European empires, intellectual capacity was readily available in every major German-speaking city because they had historically functioned as their own capitals. The byproduct of this was when the Industrial Revolution arrived in Germany, it flourished in every corner. None of the German cities were as industrious as London, but the output of any 10 cities outperformed the entire yield of the British heartland, and the Germans counted about 40 major industrial cities. This unique situation meant that industrialization in Germany was carried out in roughly 40 years, while in the United Kingdom the process lasted for about 150 years. However, unlike the British heartland, German rivers encouraged divisions. If Prussia was to maintain its newly acquired territories, it would have to force integration through artificial means. In Berlin, policymakers came up with an ingenious resolution. First, the government enacted reforms that allowed private savings to be absorbed in government banks, where technocratic bankers made sure that the funds were allocated where the state deemed fit. Next, the Berlin government came up with an innovative remedy to manufacture unity and overcome the splintered geography of the German people. By the early 19th century, steam-powered railway technology had matured enough to connect fixed points across long distances. In Prussia, the leadership became fixated with the innovation and commenced the construction of the world's first interconnected railway network. Upon completion in the 1880s, German cities and markets gained complete access to one another. Over the next decades, another emerging technology, improved fertilizers, allowed for the German agricultural output to greatly expand. In combination with the new transportation network, products were shipped to greater distances with only a fraction of the labor force previously required. The result was a substantial surplus of farmers who had no choice but to move to the larger cities in search of employment. This triggered a process of urbanization, and within a few generations, Germany became the first nation where the majority of its people was urbanized. To take advantage of its urban population, the Berlin government set up mass universities and research institutions. And in the following decades, this would propel the Germans to the forefront of science and innovation. While most nations start planning after unification, the Germans planned ahead. The state of Germany had not yet consolidated itself, but the region was already physically connected, shared a common market, enjoyed a highly skilled labor force, and was the most industrious region in the world. And these remarkable achievements had also brought a sense of pride and unity among the population. Yet, not everything was so straightforward. The striking social and economic alterations that came along with the Industrial Revolution had greatly changed the attitudes of societies across Europe. The emerging middle class wanted more civil liberties and political representation. In the Prussian holdings in 1848, a liberal rebellion forced King Frederick IV to establish the first freely elected parliament for all of Germany. The Frankfurt Parliament, as it was known, was tasked to advise the king. However, the liberal faction believed that they could only secure civil rights in a unified nation. As such, the liberal-backed parliament drafted a constitution for a unified Germany with the Prussian king as its emperor. Yet Frederick William rejected the title as he believed that the parliament lacked the legitimacy to make such a decision. The gamble turned out to be right. Roughly a year later, the liberal movement lost its momentum and split from within. As a consequence, the civil reforms were overturned, and a great deal of liberal Germans emigrated to the United States to escape political persecution. Still, calls for a unified Germany persisted, but it would be a different factor that would bring about the unification of the state. By the 1860s, Berlin's diligent planning had uplifted the Prussian holdings as the undisputed power in Europe. Its output surpassed its rivals in terms of industrial, economic, demographic, and military strength. Yet the sheer speed of Prussia's surge had also disrupted the geopolitics in the continent. It became evident that a war between the great European powers was unstoppable. On that account, the Prussian government took measures to prepare itself. In 1862, King Wilhelm I appointed Otto von Bismarck as the Prime Minister of Prussia. Bismarck was a distinguished diplomat and closely allied with equally accomplished characters such as Albrecht von Roon and Helmut von Moltke. The triumvirate devised a plan to unify the German nation not by democracy or popular will, but by blood and iron. First, Bismarck and his allies launched a military campaign to capture the German-speaking territories in the Jutland Peninsula from the Danes. Afterwards, Berlin waged a brief but decisive war with Vienna to gain additional concessions and establish itself as the uncontested powerhouse of the German world. Following these two conflicts, the government in Berlin formally integrated 22 German states into the North German Confederation, with Bismarck as the chancellor of the state. The South German countries, however, who had been allied with Austria, remained unwilling to merge with North Germany. Berlin had to find some way to integrate the remaining states without the use of violence. Thereupon, in 1870, Bismarck skillfully orchestrated a political crisis which led the French to declare war on the Prussians. The turn of events brought up the memories of the Napoleonic Wars, and Bismarck used the momentum to rally North and South Germany. The tactic worked. In view of their common adversary, the South German states embraced unification. After 2 months of fighting, the Prussian army eventually crushed the backbone of the French by capturing their emperor. While France was thrown into turmoil, the Prussian coalition went on to besiege Paris, and to add insult to injury, in 1871, in the Palace of Versailles, Prussian King Wilhelm I was declared as the Emperor of the Second German Empire, the first being the Holy Roman Empire. Following unification, Bismarck's cabinet focused on enhancing the German national identity. In the 1880s, he enacted educational reforms that made the curriculum more secular and loosened the grip of the Catholic Church in South Germany. The Berlin government also embarked on an assimilation program in the eastern provinces and established social programs such as pensions, insurances, and healthcare benefits to counter the growing influence of socialist political parties. Plus, a military alliance was secured between Germany and Austria. The latter could not join Germany as a whole because the Austrians believed that nationalism would destroy their multi-ethnic empire. Over the next decades, as nationalism electrified the German people, the Prussian heritage gradually assimilated into the German identity. Yet perhaps the most significant impact of the unification of Germany was that it utterly broke the geopolitical standoff in Europe. The French-German enmity meant that a new, even more destructive conflict was inevitable. However, since Germany lacked natural boundaries to its east and west, it was susceptible to a two-front war involving Russia and France. From this anxiety came forth a new doctrine. Policymakers in Berlin believed that if their state was to survive in the upcoming conflict, they had to strike first to gain the upper hand. In the ensuing decades, the stage was set for a new round of hostilities. The unfortunate result of this were 2 world wars, that changed the course of history and left Germany divided once more until the 1990s. I have been your host Shivan from Caspian Report. Credit goes to our contributors on Patreon who give us the resources to produce content like this on a regular schedule. For more information on our crowdfunding, visit patreon.com/Caspian Report. For now, thank you for watching and Sahol.